welcome back. This is Texas Senator Bob Hall with you again, and I've got my good friend Chairman Paul Bettencourt from Harris County, chairman of our local committee and our tax bulldog and election security bulldog, and one of my classmates. Remember, Senator Bettencourt was my first session down there. He was one of the Liberty 8. And he's still with us and stronger than ever. We had a really good local hearing talking about appraisals and local bond elections and a number of things that MUDs and PUDs and SUDs and all those things, and near and dear to some of our hearts of what we do to the people out there. And there were some things that happened that I think you guys out there should hear about without having to go back and listen to that hearing that lasted 2 days down there. So I asked Senator Bettencourt to come on with us. He's here, and thank you, Paul. Really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy down there. There's a lot going on. There's enough going on in Harrison County to keep everybody busy down there trying to keep up with them.
You know, Bob, it's just astonishing when you have a leftist, progressive, socialist majority on your commissioner's court. You know, they're not worried about defunding the police. They're not worried about raising taxes. And the really funny thing was the county judge, who is a self-identified socialist, last week out of the blue, she decided that she was cleaning voter rolls all by herself. And of course, they've had every, history point of opposing everything you and I voted for, which I guess the Liberty 5 are on. 5 of our classmates are still there, which is, the voter integrity bill. And it was just preposterous about claiming that they were cleaning up the voter rolls. You remember, Bill, you helped me, Senate Bill 1111, Bob, that basically said you don't live in a 2-inch by 3-inch PO box.
Right. Yes.
Right. And they're still fighting that. Okay, because they don't want to agree that that's the law. And even though you get your mail there, you just can't live there. Okay, so that's
right. That was the one where you had some 40-something people, wasn't it, that all had their post office boxes in one of these private post box locations.
Oh yeah, 4,800, but who's counting? Okay,
okay, 4,800.
Remember, it's Harris County. Everything is big. And
that's right.
Of that, it's just we constantly fight about the property tax, rate down there. Now that 3-2 majority is being bucked by 2 Republican commissioners who are willing to literally walk out, and like they did in Brazos County, to try to get a voter approved rate, which is the right standard for setting tax rates, and that's what gives maximum savings to the taxpayers. And in Harris County, that's $250 million, Bob. That's huge money.
Yes, that's a lot of money. Yep. So they had to walk out there. But it was an interesting time there in that hearing in particular. Had someone from Harris County coming in testifying that didn't seem to remember that they were previously on the opposite side of where they were when they came in there. And I would think, knowing Paul Bettencourt the way they did, with that steel trap mind that doesn't forget anything and can calculate to the 4th decimal point in the blink of an eye, would even come in and attempt to do that. But you had a real interesting response to them.
Well, that's my Vulcan half, Bob. But anyway, what happened is the city of Houston's lobbyist came in and was testifying against the bills that we voted for to shut down, taxpayer funded lobbying. And they used the example of the property tax relief bill, SB2, the first one that passed. And he basically said, oh, we didn't oppose it. And I looked at him and I said, I know you dropped a card that against the bill. And he kind of hemmed and hawed and all this, and finally came back around and said, well, we did oppose it, but we liked the House version that did what we wanted. And here's the sad thing. What they wanted to do was to rip out a taxpayer voted on charter amendment, Bob, that said you're going to limit your tax increases from almost 20 years ago. They wanted that to be part of the reform bill. So they wanted to rip it out. And then they wanted to claim that they were not honoring the public's will by opposing, coming in and opposing a taxpayer lobby reform bill. It was preposterous. And the more he talked, the deeper he got into the hole. because everybody knew that he was talking like this, because, you can't have, taxing units say they're for something when they're really not, and when they actually testified against tax relief. That's what the city of Houston did. This is the world I live in. So just be happy you guys are Rockwall centric and not Houston centric on tax relief.
Oh yeah, no, some of that stuff makes a real big difference whether you're in the rural counties or the big counties in there. But the other thing that came up, we talked about in there were the bond issues, where we've seen, I think it got started with Senator Eckhart being proud of the fact that in Travis County, the folks had voted down a bond a couple of times. And I point out, one of my counties had voted down a bond a couple of times. And then she was proud of they figure out a way to get around that and leased out the property they were really going to build the building on, I think, and then went ahead and did it anyhow. And
yeah, this all got started because a gentleman flew in from Amarillo, and you classic business guy, very unhappy with the fact that in Amarillo they had a $250 million bond for a civic center, and it failed. Well, immediately the city of Amarillo went to some great legal maneuvering to try to just release it on tax anticipation notes, which means no vote, and actually no authorization by elected officials except their TERS board, which is another tax increment reinvestment zone. That's another appointed board. It just blew my head off. And I think the committee members like you, Bob, with exception of one senator, okay, that they would go wire around it. And the thing, what I don't understand is in the Travis County case, they have actually, I think it failed once, maybe twice. So look, if the voters say no, the voters mean no. And what was sad was to find out here's another new path to spend $250 million in Amarillo. That's like spending $3.2 billion in Harris County. It's a huge amount of money to do after the public just said no. Now my guess there's going to be a lot of new city council members shortly up there because it's a preposterous public policy to wire around the public vote.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is, as I mentioned in the hearing, that's the ultimate in disrespect to the voters.
Absolutely.
They have a different viewpoint, and they are there to express their opinion. And when they do that with a vote that says, no, we don't think we need that, we don't want it, then they should also have the opportunity to live with the consequences of not doing it. And so it should not be done. Matter of fact, I'm thinking about maybe we need to have a bill that says that in the event that a entity like a county or a city goes against the vote of the people and does something after they voted it down, it would automatically trigger a re-election for those that voted for it. And to really discourage them, I would say that if those that voted for it decided to run again, then they get to finance the election. So it doesn't cost them to have it. Let them pay for it.
Well, the bill I hope would come to my committee where it would get a favorable hearing, because look, you're right. I mean, the reason why we're asking people to go to take their projects to the public is so the public can either give a yes or no. Okay. And either one is good. But what really had set this whole debate off, Bob, it was that we had like about at least a half a dozen school districts that were wiring around the money the state was sending for tax relief on maintenance and operations.
Yes.
And two of them were in my neck of the woods, Fort Bend and Katy. These are big school districts. And they are going to the public and saying, please approve a taxpayer ratification election to raise my M&O to the exact same level that it was prior to being cut by the state. Now, the folks have to vote on that. But I think the folks are going to be outraged when they find out they've only got two choices: that give up their tax relief, or if they voted for it, they have no tax relief. Either way, they're not going to be happy. I think they're going to be furious. But it's all about truth in government, Bob. And see, you're a big stalwart on the committee because you'll speak out like that about truth in government. And a lot of these people, like in Amarillo, how do you go back to your public and say, well, you voted no, but we wired around it and we're spending $250 million anyway. You know, I mean, and there's no record vote.
That's
You know,
right.
no record vote of except some TERS board. Oh, come on.
Right. No. And so, you know, that kind of, we have to figure out some way to stop that, because the voters are the ultimate. When they decide on something, you know, that'd be kind of like somebody in office that says, well, I don't care what the vote was, I'm not leaving. You know, I'm going to stay in office. Or I don't care what the vote was, get out. I'm going to take over the office. The same thing. But before we run out of time here, I know you got things you got to get to. Let's talk about this thing about appraisals, because this is one thing that seems to rock everybody's boat every year when they get their notice of what their appraisal is. And you know, it's kind of a good news, bad news kind of thing. The good news is, hey, your house is worth a whole lot more than it was before. The bad news is you're going to have to pay for something that you get no income to pay for it with. And what bothered me, and we've talked about in the committee, was that we seem to spend a great deal of time trying to fabricate an appraisal value. I mean, the form that we went through, what was that, 9 pages long of calculations they have to go through to come up with an appraisal value, and having to make up all these facts and figures and so on about what happened or didn't happen to come up with this number. And we keep saying it has to be the market value. It has to be consistent with that. I say, why don't we just go straight to the market value? Take a look at what did it sell for? What did it sell for? And calculate it off of a simple calculation based on market value. Maybe divide the county up in some way, or have some factors to it, but have the marketplace. The marketplace doesn't lie. I mean, you're a big free market guy, just like I am. And we know that one place that's telling the truth when government doesn't mess with it is the marketplace, right?
Right, Bob. Look, the whole basis for all these property tax reforms is that as values go up, tax rates are supposed to come down and offset it. Okay.
Right.
Now, you made a great point in the hearing, because it's really about jurisdictional levies. That's what's being measured now, that they're supposed to control that. So as values go up, the tax rate gets forced down for tax relief. Now you made your great point was, look, we need to simplify this so that the average person can understand it. And also, for the first time, you'll be able to see it on a portal. You're able to go see your actual tax bill. That's one of the big reforms that have come out of SB2, so that people can see the tax rate setting process. Because if people tell you that they're not lowering your tax rate, they're just keeping the tax rates the same, and it's not their problem for voting for it. Well, that's not tax relief. That's not cutting your tax bill. And so finally, that part of the bill is now online this year, so people can see their own individual property. Because before, what you would see, as you talked about, was the tax levy of the whole jurisdiction. And that may not affect the tax levy the same way as it does an individual property. So you made a great point about simplification on all this. And we're getting to the point where we actually are now getting enough data so we can actually see an individual property on a statewide level.
Right. And what I had with our 3.5% limit and a 2.5% from the counties and cities and 3.5% on the schools, very few people actually see that number, because it's a county-wide collection number that it limits. And so people actually have their taxes going up more than that. And one of my questions was, we need to look at what would it take to address it so individuals have the protection we're talking about as we go forward. Because all we've really done to date, other than mess with the homestead and give a little more deduction there, is slow the growth. We're not really gotten to where we're reducing people's property tax yet. And I hopefully that we'll come up with some ideas that will at least get a hearing and talk about and start a path forward to doing a shift where people can actually look forward to a reduction in property tax over some period of time. I mean, we know it's going to have to be a swap. We're not just going to be able to get rid of property tax without taxing something else.
Right. You know, and the key thing, Bob, you touched on it, is Yeah, regardless of what taxation system you use, you've got to control the growth of government spending. Because if you don't control the growth of government spending, it doesn't matter what happens. You know, you can look at what's happening in Washington. You know, we're no longer in regular order. There are no budgets. It's continuing resolution. Boom. You and I would not, as stalwarts as we are on budget hawks, it would be horrific for us not to have a balanced budget amendment in Texas government, because there wouldn't be enough of you and I to go around to try to stop all this by banging on it. Okay. So what we have to do is make sure that we've got top-down guidelines that slow the growth of government. Now, they are finally in there, because if we didn't have the bills that were passed, Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 3, people would be jumping off an appraisal cliff this year, because there would be no protection at all unless you were homesteaded. And then even then you got 10%, but we did also get you help on homestead exemption increases, which Lieutenant Governor wants to crank up, because that goes straight to the homestead no matter what these ISDs do. See, what really got me crazed at the start of the meeting, Bob, and I kind of lit it all off, is because we spend all this time. It's a huge fight to pass property tax relief. You've seen it. That bill, that SB2 that you voted for, the Lieutenant Governor really had to threaten to pull up the floorboards in the Senate to get that bill to pass back in 2019. And,
Right.
and when you see that happen, and then you've got school districts that are purposely wiring around it with a new strategy, take this taxpayer ratification, wrap it up in Christmas paper, put a bow on it, say, here, vote for it. And oh, by the way, if you vote for it, you'll never get property tax relief, because those pennies are not compressible at that point. And so that stuff you vote for will stay with you the rest of your life. It just drove me nuts. So you made a great point about simplification. You made a great point about us looking at it. And I want to point out, you've already voted for twice for a big tax rate reduction. We voted for the second special session and the third, which was the theory of, look, we'll take half of the excess surplus and give it back to taxpayers. And that got out of the Senate in a bipartisan way, but the education establishment blocked it in the House because they don't like tax rate compression. You know, so we're going to have these fights and they're worth having it, because it's really the taxpayers' money. See, that's the whole bottom line. Everything that we've done, get it to a vote to the public. If the public approves it, like they did in Austin, you know, I was shocked that a double-digit tax increase went through in Austin. But in Lubbock County, the sheriff went and said, hey, I need some more money. They approved it too. So, but at the same time, like these school districts that are pulling this basically, you know, hijinks, I'm going to go in and do my best to robocall in there and say, look, if you vote for all this, it means you don't get any property tax relief. So the old Latin saying is buyer beware. So I'm going to put that out to the public. And I know you would too, Bob.
Oh, absolutely. And that leads me to the one other issue that we talked about quite a bit, was the truth in voting on a bond issue on the ballot. When it talked about the requirement to put the words up there, this will increase your taxes, and the locals arguing against it. No, it's not going to increase their taxes. And we talked about, well, yes and no. If you're asking, is it going to increase how much you pay each year in taxes? You probably answer is no, because they work it in there so that it doesn't actually make a contribution to an increase. But if they didn't do it, you would expect a decrease. But the other side of it is, in the totality of the total amount that you're going to pay, you are going to pay more taxes because of the money you borrowed. I use the example, like when I bought my first automobile and brand new car, and I went in and found one. I said, "Hey, that's really good." And he told me how much the monthly payments were going to be for it. And I said, "Oh, I'm just a second lieutenant in the Air Force. I don't make enough. I can't afford that
Right.
much of a payment." And he said, "Well, let me see what I can do so I can get the price down." He comes back a few minutes later and he gives me another monthly payment that was about 75. It was down to what I could afford. And I said, "Yeah, well, that sounds really good. I was surprised you were able to cut the price. How did that work?" He says, "Oh, that's because you're going to have to pay $2,000 more down payment on
Right.
the on the thing." And the other alternative came back was he stretched the payments out over
Yeah, right.
a couple more years, where I paid even more for the car, but trying to tell me I wasn't paying as much monthly on it. It's the smoke and mirrors that out there that we've got to get away from. In government, we've got to be honest with the people. We've got to tell them the truth about what it is, not try to blindside them with presenting it one way when it's really another way. And that's one of the things that I know you've been working on, and I think we need to continue to work on. We need transparency. We need accountability. We need transparency, and we need to be accurate in everything that we do out there.
Well, someday you have to tell me what you bought, because you've told me that story now.
I bought a Dodge Dart.
Okay, well then.
It was the first year the Dodge Dart came out. Yes.
Well, all right. Very important for everybody to know this. When you go in on any school district bond issue, it says this is a tax increase, because it is. If you buy a bond, for lack of a better description, if you authorize your school district to do a bond, it has to be paid back. There's no free lunch, as you've said. It's either, how long is the term, or how much is the bond, and the combination of those two factors say this is what you pay on your debt rate. Now, for your school taxes. So now, by the way, for taxpayers, good news. 52% of all bond issues failed last November. Failed with an F. Okay. All right. And that meant people were watching it. And the other thing is people actually went through because of another bill. I think Senator Birdwell had this one, where instead of having a giant blob of everything, you would have like schools, technology, nanatoriums, whatever, blah, blah, blah from there. And people could pick what they wanted to approve. See, it goes back to something that was why that voter approval rate had to be in that first big property tax relief. Because I just did an interview today with an unnamed, a media company, and who was shocked to find out that, that there were voter approval mechanisms in the bill, because they weren't told that when they had an interview with the tax spenders. Now, for us as the proponents of the taxpayers, yeah, that's going to be in everything we do. So it was really interesting to see the passage rate plummet, as people now know that if you vote for a bond issue, it's a tax increase. And choose wisely is my advice. Okay, because it will hold your tax rate up and raise your taxes, no question about it, even if it doesn't actually raise the tax rate in a high inflationary environment.
Absolutely. And that's something people have to pay attention to. And I know for sure coming into this next session that the issue of taxpayer relief is going to be a major issue. We're going to be spending a lot of time talking about that. It's one of the things I hear the most about. It comes the interest out there that I'm seeing. It's right there behind election security and grid security is property tax relief.
And Bob, in Harris County and these urban counties, it's crime, and then property taxes. Okay. Yeah. Of course, the border's in there too, but that's just kind of an extension of the top one. Yeah. And the bottom one itself. And right. And so there's no question that we're going to have that discussion. I think we had a colleague in the House roughly from your area basically say, hey, he wants to move the rollback rate up from 3.5 back to 8, because he had TAC and TML tell him that they can't handle that. Okay. They got to go back to the old, what took us 38 years to drop. So there's going to be a lot of fights about this, but I'd rather be on the taxpayer side with Senator Bob Hall and the rest of the folks that know that taxation, excessive taxation, is a threat to liberty, i.e. our classmates and all the good senators that voted for SB2 and, back originally, that be on the side of the tax spender. So I appreciate, Bob, as always, your clarion call for the truth.
And yours, Paul. I appreciate your leadership on the local. Appreciate working on that one with you. Dealing with the muds and the puds and the suds is fun. but we got some good serious issues there that
We do.
people, and we'll
Look
get
forward to
it.
working with you in the next session, Bob.
All right. Thanks for coming on. And folks, thanks for being with us today. There you hear it firsthand from our chairman, Senator Paul Bettencourt from Harris County. And we'll be back with you here soon and talk some more about the other legislation we expect to come up. In the meantime, God bless you. God bless Texas.